This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
Dunning-Kruger cognitive bias, and I'd better be careful that I don't illustrate it as I attempt to define it, occurs when a person pontificates upon a subject about which he or she knows insufficient to present a valid or even a sensible case. Here I discuss an extraordinarily asinine example expounded by Todd Friel of Wretched Radio. The Dunning-Kruger effect was first analysed and described formally by social psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger in 1999, but quite clearly and hardly surprisingly, it had been recognised long before. Considering the preposterous nonsense spewed forth by the man from Wretched Radio,
evolution, can you trust it? I don't think so.
It's deliciously appropriate that it should have been Darwin who wrote, "Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge." Many attempts have been made to illustrate the effect by plotting confidence against competence. The resulting graph is self-explanatory. Some people, a little unkindly perhaps, have called that first peak Mount Stupid. So let's now witness Todd Friel's inadvertent demonstration of the Dunning-Kruger effect as he confidently attacks perfectly good science by the application of his profound knowledge deficit and shameless hubris, and try to help him out of it. Of course we'll fail because...
Don't trust a thing that they teach you, though, because it all comes from a wrong worldview. They don't have the right worldview to interpret anything.
What? Scientists are unable to interpret anything?
And we have a filter. We have a lens. We've got one. They've got one. We've got a historical record. It's called the Bible.
Oh, of course. We might as well pack up now.
This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
Hello. This is Wretched Radio. Evolution. Can you trust it? I don't think so. Not when they're constantly changing their mind. All you can tell from a dead bone is something with a bone died. And yet they make up fanciful tales and they change them constantly.
This is the bone to which Todd Friel is referring, all of his information obtained from a cursory, prejudged glance at two items in the popular press. I will show how easily, given the intelligent application of informed interpretation rather than dogmatic dismissal, one may discover much more from dead bones than just
something with a bone died.
OK, Todd, let's start with an easy one. Is all you can tell from this dead bone something with a bone died? I'm sure even you could tell that this is a wishbone, that it came from a bird, that it came from somewhere in its neck, and that the bird was likely a chicken, which you could easily check by having a look at the remains of a roast chicken dinner. After Thanksgiving, you could also confirm it's not a turkey wishbone, and from its size that it's not an ostrich or a hummingbird wishbone. That's a lot more than just, it died. Even you could make up quite a tale from that information, and it wouldn't be fanciful. Here's another dead bone for you, Todd. This one might not be so easy to make up a story about right away, but what could you tell from it? Again, not too much to ask. If you had the remains of a chicken dinner to examine, couldn't you make a comparison with its bones and see if it matched one of them? Then you'd be able to tell which part of the body it came from, and that it's a femur, a thigh bone. And then, since you've got it there for reference, rummage through the rest of the carcass and discover that the animal that had owned the femur had the capacity for flight. You don't need the Bible to tell you that. You can work it out for yourself. The more you look and think about what you see, the more you can know, and that's a lot more than it's a bone from something that died. You, Todd Friel, who declared,
all you can tell from a dead bone is something with a bone died,
could easily work that out for yourself, were you not determined to deny such obvious facts with equally obviously absurd ridicule. Here's a bone that's completely different. Strictly speaking, it's not just a dead bone, it's several. Can you tell anything about it apart from that it's a bone and dead? Brief silence while we wait for Todd to think and then answer. You aren't expected to know what sort of fish it was, but it's not cartilaginous, so not a shark. only 10 inches long, so not a grouper or a marlin. Another clue is that it has been a Scottish breakfast, and if you could smell it, you'd know it was smoked, and the aroma would suggest a kipper. Therefore, it was a herring. Something with a bone died? Phooey. Now, Todd, what about this dead bone I picked up from the forest floor in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina? Is it unusual enough to pique your interest? It does mine. First, I don't know the identity of its former owner, but could probably find out if I tried. But then what happened to it? I showed it to a mammal expert who recognised that scalloped effect, having seen similar in Scotland. In some environments, calcium can be a limiting nutrient, and herbivorous animals need to find unusual ways of getting it into their diet. It's quite well known, though not to me until I found out, that they will chew the bones of decomposing carcasses, scraping vigorously with their lower incisors. This was probably a large cow bone, and the herbivore that scraped it almost certainly white-tailed deer. Fascinating, but only if you're curious to know things. Here's a dead bone that provides its own explanation, if you bother to ask. Next, 3 non-bone fragments from which, just as with single bones, the original owner's identity can be deduced. So the question is, what can we deduce from this? It's the bonnet badge from one of only 3 models of Austin, so we can be quite precise in our identification, not just stare at it blankly and declare it to be the last remaining unidentifiable fragment of something that no longer exists. This, I happen to know, came from a 1956 A30 Countryman, my first car, gone to the scrapyard decades ago. Now, Todd, do you not know what sort of object this is, separated from its owner? I think it's quite likely that if you compared it with other brake shoes in workshop manuals or parts catalogues, or ask a supplier of replacement parts, you could find out exactly what it is. Is there a part number stamped on it? It wouldn't take much if you really wanted to know. It's the same procedure with dead bones, except you won't find a part number, of course. This object is a bit more difficult, but by no means impossible. It was lying in the road by Inverness Hospital and provides several clues that could lead to an approximate or even precise identification. Unquestionably, it was once part of a vehicle. Recent damage suggests that it became attached quite violently, probably in an accident. It's a door handle, but not from a modern vehicle or a car. It's more likely from a small commercial vehicle, a van, perhaps its rear door. Next, let's search Google Images for van door handles, and we soon find. If not the exact make or model, this is a more likely candidate than, I don't know, because all you can tell from a detached door handle is that it's an object lying in the road that we'll never be able to identify, so we just give up. With a bit more research we might be able to match the key number with the individual vehicle. How satisfying would that be? Certainly better than a public declaration of ignorance.
All you can tell from a dead bone is something with a bone died.
No, we can all do better than that. Museums and research institutes have reference collections, particularly of bones and fossils, of which there are millions. One of the first things you do with an unknown bone is visit a reference collection and make comparisons. You might get lucky and make an identification, or you might get equally lucky and discover you have something new to science. But you don't have to make do with
all you can tell from a dead bone is something with a bone died.
Here are some of the bones of something that died. If you found just one of these bones, this one for instance, and you had access to a reference collection, you could compare it with better known material, such as this excellent specimen, which is just one of several in a variety of attitudes and states of partial completeness. There have been plenty of instances when a single bone has been considered the same species as, or related to, a known example in its context.
From the Wall Street Journal, this is the big evolutionary story. Fossil points to a vanished human species in the Himalayas. I will just read from 2 different articles. One is from the Wall Street Journal. The other one is from National Geographic. Absolutely fantastic. And I don't mean like, that's incredibly good. I'm talking about ridiculous. A fossil jaw. Stop. A fossil jaw. That's it. One fossil of one jaw, and now we've got a brand new theory. Fossil points to a vanished human species in the Himalayas. One bone. Okay, let me just remind you. The Denisovan ancestors split from their Neanderthal relatives 400,000 years ago, and they headed east into Asia. We get this narrative from a jawbone, 3 teeth, a fingertip, and a toe bone.
Hang on, Todd. First you say...
A fossil jaw. That's it. One fossil of one jaw, and now we've got a brand new theory.
And now you've said...
Let me just remind you. The Denisovan ancestors split from their Neanderthal relatives 400,000 years ago, and they headed east into Asia. We get this narrative from a jawbone, 3 teeth, a fingertip, and a toe bone.
I'm not at all convinced you've considered this properly. Those bones yielded a ton of evidence from which those scientists devised their theory. It wasn't just a guess based on a glance at a single bone. We know you know that, because you said so. Todd obtained all of his information by cursorily scanning 2 popular press articles, from which he omits to mention, because he didn't read that far and which, I suggest, he wouldn't understand anyway, the most important findings that informed what he denigrates as scientists' fanciful tales. He doesn't bother to confirm anything in these 2 popularised interpretations with reference to the original scientific publication, easily found online, and doesn't even compare the paleontologist's claims against his own evidence source.
We've got a historical record. It's called the Bible.
By design or accident, more likely through indolence, he completely overlooked the crucial information that, unlike some of the other Denisovan bone samples previously analysed, the jawbone did not contain any sequenceable DNA. It also didn't yield any protein, but one of the teeth did. That was the material which provided sound evidence for the fanciful tales the scientists made up, amplifying previously resolved fanciful tales. Todd, you really should read and learn so that you can provide backup evidence for your flagrant denials. Shallow cherry-picking and hollow ridicule proclaim the sheer asininity of your reasoning. A scientist whose name usually crops up when these studies are being discussed is Swedish paleogeneticist Svante Pääbo, who led the team that sequenced the Neanderthal genome, which was subsequently compared with ours, and then, when material became available, with the Denisovan genome. Not only are the 3 species related, but when they coexisted, they interbred. We modern humans are undeniably descendants of all 3. Fanciful tales? No, exciting science. We know the facts of the Denisovan part of this relationship because, unlike the jawbone, part of this finger bone did yield DNA. Even Todd knows how accurate that can be for identifications, or does he deny police use of the technology? A constantly increasing wealth of archaeological, anatomical and genetical information has enabled scientists to piece together a very persuasive, fanciful tale about early humans that is communicated through reasoned, evidence-loaded discussion, much more convincing than Todd Friel-style incoherent renunciation offered unsupported other than with a self-reassuring tightened grip on the Bible. What do you say, Todd?
I'm telling you, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but do you think with the legalization of cannabis, there's a lot more of it being used in evolutionary quarters so that they can concoct this nonsense? I'm just throwing it out there for conversation's sake. This is Wretched Radio.
I gratefully acknowledge the work of several transatlantic YouTube rationalists who really know what they're talking about when debunking creationist nonsense with sound scientific information. 3 in particular spring to mind: Aaron Ra, Paul Ogier and Vice Rhino. Vice Rhino recently dealt with Todd Friel's vacuous anti-Denisovan diatribe, and his excellent treatment inspired me to try a different slant on it, this presentation. It's a precursor to part 2, which will be about transitional species, a subject the creationists willfully mangle with routine visits to the very summit of the Dunning-Kruger Mount Stupid.